Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters Podcast. I'm your host, Liz Lang, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Burton. In this podcast, we will talk about all things mental health. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Dr. Mark Burton, and this week we're going to switch gears a little bit and we're going to talk about longevity. And this topic came about because it's something that Mark has been really into lately, and he's open about his age. He's in his mid to late 60s, and so he is in that age of life where you want to see your grandkids grow and you want to
Yes.
live as long as you can.
hmm
So I'll let you tell more about this, about how and why you got into this.
Well, I think that we're living longer as a species, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's a lot because of healthcare. For a lot of people, it's because of nutrition and things like that. And so, given that we're living longer, I think what I got interested in was how do you live longer and have a really productive or happy, life? So, because a lot of it is how you feel physically. This is how it ties into mental health. There's such a strong connection between our mind, our brain, and our body. And so they're all connected. And so if we're living longer, well, if what happens, it's sad because a lot of people get dementia or
Yeah.
Alzheimer's. And I was just talking to a client today whose mother is really in late stage Alzheimer's. And it's so sad because they're still alive, but yet they're gone. And he thinks of her as, being deceased already just because she is not there cognitively at all.
Yeah.
So if we live longer, then part of longevity is how do you stay healthy, but not just healthy in your body, how do you stay healthy in your brain?
Hmm.
And so that's one of the reasons that I got interested in it. I think I wanted to have a healthy brain as I got older. And so longevity, there's really a lot of people doing a lot of good research on it.
Hmm.
And I think that what we're going to do tonight is just talk about some of the things that people can do. Mostly, I'm going to give some references so that if our listeners are interested, I'll tell them where to go to get more information. Now, a lot of this information, it's really, I'd say, dense is the word I would use because they're talking about biology,
Hmm.
and biology is fairly complicated. And so the things that we're going to talk about tonight, I try and simplify them. I think
Hmm.
that's probably from my own brain, but realize that this stuff is incredibly complicated. And there are a lot of really smart people out there who really understand it. And so those are the people that I've listened to. And I'll give you the names later on for our listeners. But I think when you think about longevity, there are different factors that play into it. And certainly genetics is one, and
Hmm.
then the environment in which you live, and then lifestyle. And all three are equally important. And we'll talk a little bit about all of them. So that's
Okay.
how I got interested.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, I think they're all important, but I think genetics is probably one of the biggest factors, or it's at least it's the one you have the least amount of control over, because you can't
Right.
help it if you, I mean, because for me, thinking about my own longevity, I don't know that I have a chance because, and maybe I do, I don't know, because my grandma had early onset Alzheimer's. And
hmm
by the time she was, I think in her like 60s or 70s, yeah, I think by the time she was in her 60s, she had full blown Alzheimer's. Now, I think her environment and her lifestyle probably was a factor in that. She definitely didn't live a healthy lifestyle,
hmm
but we know that there is a genetic component to Alzheimer's. There's also a genetic component to things like cancer and, all of those kinds of things that, I mean, sometimes
Right.
the odds just aren't in your favor.
Right. And so I think there's a genetic marker even for dementia or Alzheimer's that they can test for. But the thing that's changing and that I really want to convey to our listeners is that the environment and your lifestyle have a huge impact and can actually change the expression of those genes.
Yeah.
And so just because you have the genes does not the markers for it does
Hmm.
not necessarily mean that that's going to happen. And so you can, what you eat, how you exercise, where you live, what the pollution is like, all of those things and a lot more factor into it. And so I think we have more control. I think what we're finding out is we have more control over our destiny than we thought.
Okay.
That we do not just have to be, constrained by our genetic makeup anymore.
Right. Right. So we give a lot of caveats in this. And so as I was reading through this, we're gonna give suggestions. And I think that, any one of these suggestions, again, they're just suggestions or they're things that people know work. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do all of these, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so because one of the things that you sent me was about religion and how you
Hmm.
need to about how religion can actually increase your lifespan. And I mean, clearly, I mean, and Mark, you're open about the fact that, I mean, you're an atheist. And so,
Right.
again, I think you still have just as good a shot at longevity as anyone else.
Well, here's what that is. And what I sent you, there are, I think, throughout the world, they call them blue zones, and I think
Yes.
there are five of them
Okay.
if you look at the map. And so there are certain qualities that are common throughout these blue zones. And one of them happened to be, I think it said it was like a weekly attendance at some sort of religious service.
Hmm.
Now, what I think that means, and this comes off of the study that I think I've mentioned before, that I think there may be a component of a spiritual belief, but it's really about community.
Hmm.
Because when you think about, so mental health wise, in these communities where the blue zones, where the people often live to 100 or more, that's what
Hmm.
I think that's the designation of what makes it a blue zone. They have this strong sense of community. Now, I think where a lot of people get that is in a religious setting, which makes a lot of
Hmm.
sense to me because it's easy to do. You have people with like-minded goals, you
Yep.
have kind of have the same values. And so just to have that setting be so positive makes a lot of sense to me.
Right.
I think that it's more what we're finding, it's more the strength and the quality of the relationships you have.
Hmm.
And typically, I think in a religious setting, those tend to be pretty good, usually. I've
And
certainly
it's,
seen where they aren't that good, but I think by and large, they're really good.
and as someone who's been pretty devoutly religious her entire life, I can say that, yeah, I have a lot of really positive relationships. And, in my religion personally, it's influenced almost everything about my life. And, and I'm pretty happy with that too. But I think that it's important for people to know and understand that you can get that outside of a religion. I think it's more about belief. And that's one of the things that you sent in this outliner and these topics that you wanted to discuss is that it comes down to a purpose, right? And
Right.
you need to have
Yes.
a purpose. And you can find that in all sorts of ways. I know you take great purpose in your kids, particularly in your
And my
grandkids.
grandkids, yeah, my kids and my
Hmm.
grandkids. That's
Yeah.
right. I think what you often get in religious communities is that support.
Yes.
And I think a lot of churches, maybe not all of them, but a lot of churches do that really well. And so as you think about aging, so for instance, if you, let's say you age and you've been married for 70 years and your partner dies, then you want to be able to have support around you, right? The people come in and what if you don't have extended family? And so often that religious community is where you get that support at times when you need it.
Hmm.
And so it makes a lot of sense to me, those different qualities that come from those blue zones. The other
Yeah.
thing that I don't know if I put in here, in the blue zones, is, and this comes from the one that's in Italy. I think it's in Sardinia.
Hmm.
And when they were interviewing people, the older people, there is this respect that they have for people who are older.
Okay.
And often in cultures, I don't know that I feel that in our culture. I mean, I hear a lot of people talking about it that, we don't value people as they age. And I think there are some cultures where they do, they are valued
Hmm.
as you age and you're seen as someone who's had a lot of life experience and who has wisdom, things like that. But while we're talking about the blue zones, so its purpose, it's here's the common theme in all the people that I listen to is exercise or moving your body.
Yeah.
The way they describe it in these blue zones is that they move naturally. And what that means is that mostly it means they're walking.
Okay.
And so, like in Sardinia, it's a very hilly place, and the I remember listening to this man talk about it, and he's walking up and down these hills, and he's over 100 years old, but he's been doing it all his life. So that's going to be a common theme in all of these people. Is you've got to be able to move your body and exercise. And
Hmm.
these blue zones, they do it naturally.
Okay. I mean, if anyone, you know, is considering longevity, get into biking. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
there are so many great benefits to biking. I mean, because it's great cardio and I mean, it's low impact on your joints. I'm a little biased because I'm a pretty big cycling enthusiast, but I mean, there's so many great benefits to it. And it's something, I mean, I've seen people in their 80s out there still biking.
Oh,
I
I had
mean,
a
so
client. Yeah, I had a client who was in his 80s who that's what he did. He got out on
mhm,
his bike.
yeah,
I think one of the other things that I want to mention in the blue zones that really stood out to me, they put loved ones first. Family
yes.
comes first. And I think that's really important because we get all those things. We get really deep connections, we get support. There are all these positives. People who end up living alone typically, are isolated, typically don't live very long.
Hmm.
And so one of those important factors to longevity is having family and support and group around you.
So I'm curious about becoming a widow or a widower and what that can do to your longevity. So, I mean, losing your spouse. And, that's not to say that you can't remarry and be happy, but I mean, losing your spouse has to affect your longevity to some extent, right?
I don't know that it does. It depends on if you isolate.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and so it's all like, do you have a support network? Do you have a tribe, is what they call it, or community is probably a better word. Do you have a community? Now, your extended family may not live around you, but what we do know, like, so I have a brother who's, I don't know, 10 years older than I am, and his wife, oh, she died of breast cancer. And so he lives with his oldest daughter.
Okay.
And we do know that there are incredibly positive benefits. And well, you have that.
Yes. Oh,
You
yeah.
have that with your father-in-law
Hmm.
living with you. And I think you have talked about it as being a generally positive experience.
It
And
really is.
right. And so, but if we talk about it from his perspective, I would guess it's a very positive experience because it gives him meaning. I think you talked about, I don't know if on air, but you talked about how he loves to be with your grandkids, your kids,
Yeah.
and I just think there are a huge number of benefits. And I know there can be some drawbacks, but to me, it speaks to the importance of maintaining good and healthy family relationships throughout the
Hmm.
lifespan so that when you get to that point, you don't have to go through some big repair process or that you aren't isolated, that you aren't alone. So
Yeah.
I understand that a lot of people don't have that particular family dynamic. I get it.
Hmm.
But I think you can also get that support in that community other places.
Right.
So,
And
if there's been a rift in the family for whatever reason, I think you can find it somewhere else. The importance is connection. It's
yes.
connection.
And if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense to me because I mean, connection and people, they give us a reason to live. And
Hmm.
so it gives you a reason to keep fighting, right? And so backtracking really quick, I think one of the reasons that it has worked out so well to have my father-in-law living with us is we both think that the other is getting the better deal out of it. So, I mean, he's so grateful to have a place to live that he does a lot for us, and we're so grateful that he does so much for us that we're happy to give him a place to live. And so
Uh-huh.
it's this really great cycle that we're in of just, I think, gratitude and, mutual respect and mutual benefit. And I think that ties in quite nicely with what we're talking about tonight is, I mean, we get a lot of benefits from relationships.
Yes.
And
Yeah, we
so,
do. And it keeps your mind active. And so one of
mhm,
the other things that stands out, because we were talking about Alzheimer's or dementia, and that if you keep your brain active,
yes.
then that really is a protective factor. And for instance, I think I've mentioned this before. Every day there's a program called Duolingo, which I
Hmm.
love Duolingo.
Okay. Yeah.
Some of our listeners may do, but I do French lessons and Spanish lessons. And so I switch back and forth, which can be challenging because they're really close together. But so we do that. The other thing I've heard is like number puzzles. Music is really good.
Hmm.
Dancing is so dancing is positive because it incorporates, you have to learn those steps, which
Yep.
I did this when both my daughters got married. We took dance classes because I wanted to do we had a band and at the weddings and wanted to do the first dance, and it was tough. And
Hmm.
so you combine music and then trying to remember these specific steps, and that is really good for your brain.
Yeah.
Really good for your brain.
Curtis's grandma did that. I mean, she danced for years. I mean, and the woman's 93 years old, and I think they made her stop. They told her she had to stop. I mean, because it wasn't healthy for her anymore. But yeah, I mean, it goes back to that exercising and that kind of natural
Mhm,
movement. And I think you
mhm,
get that from dancing. And, I think puzzles are a really great way to keep your mind active, but also
mhm.
just never stop learning.
Yes, yeah, that's it. And there's so many ways to learn throughout the lifespan.
Well, and I'm
I think
sure,
about my own father, and he died early 60s of cancer. But after he retired, it was always sad to me because about the only thing he did is he'd sit at the kitchen table and he'd play solitaire.
oh,
And and I felt really sad to
yeah,
see that happen. And so I think that, as we were talking about family connections, I think what it does is it keeps your mind active.
yeah,
And I think one of the worst things you can do, and I've talked about, I have a bias against watching too much TV, but I think one of the worst things you can do is plop yourself in front of a TV, which is a lot of retired people do, because it's kind of mind numbing. It's
hmm,
not necessarily mind expanding. And so, really, the key to protective factors for any type of dementia or Alzheimer's is to keep your mind active every single day.
yeah, yeah. And so, and I mean, there's so many ways that you can do that. I mean, Mark, I imagine you are ever learning stuff in your field.
Well, and I like that, and that's true. So it's one of those things that, I'm going to continue doing because I have an interest in it. And I
Yeah.
think I don't know if I've said this to our listeners, but I've decided that I'm not really going to retire. I'm going to stay active. I may not work as much as I do now, but I don't see any reason to quit working entirely. And so it goes back to what you said earlier, having a purpose.
Yeah.
Life is really important. I mean, there are all these factors that key into, longevity, but having a purpose, that's the mental health aspect of it too, is we stay active, we stay focused at times, and it's really important. So one of the things I do want to talk about is what do you do as far as lifestyle habits?
Yes.
Because that's one of the things that you can control. And so what is clear to me and all these people I'm listening to is that there are certain things that we should do and certain things we shouldn't do. Now, before I start talking about alcohol, I want to make a statement. I don't think have a moral issue with it. If people drink, that's fine.
Hmm.
But what is becoming clear is that alcohol is damaging to your brain.
Hmm.
And so if you want to maintain a healthy brain, and I'll make a kind of a sweeping statement. I think you should consider not drinking.
Okay.
Now, where that runs into trouble, there's some evidence that people who drink red wine, there's a component in red wine called resveratrol, and it's one of those compounds that has been found to really be important in longevity. And so if you were to look at, say, Sardinia again in Italy, I'm guessing those people who are over 100 are drinking red wine every day.
Now, I'm curious though, is there something is there another there's got to be another source of it though.
So I take resveratrol every day, kind of heavy doses. I take enough resveratrol because you can buy it in
Okay.
pill form. I take enough every day that probably like 50 bottles of wine. Because as far as the research goes, you could not consume as much resveratrol as they're saying you should by drinking wine. It's just too much. The
Yeah.
thinking, so in these cultures, like the French do it, the French and their adolescents start drinking red wine fairly early on. They're thinking that if you don't overdo it,
Okay.
if you're having one or two glasses, say of red wine a day for the lifespan, then you're getting this huge benefit from the resveratrol.
So I think there's an important distinction here is that they're not drinking to get drunk.
Right.
And I think that's a big important factor because in a lot of places throughout the world, and certainly in America, it's socially acceptable to drink,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
and in social circles, it's very common, especially in celebratory circumstances,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
And so, I mean, I think if you are smart in your alcohol consumption, I don't think that having a few glasses of wine or having some
Yeah.
champagne every now and then, I don't think it's going to take years off your life, right?
No.
But if you are drinking excessively, it is going to.
Right. And I can't remember if I've mentioned this before. So I've mentioned Andrew Huberman, who does a podcast, and he's a neuroscientist out of Stanford. In one of his episodes, he deals with the effects of alcohol in the brain. And it goes on probably for an hour and a half or 2 hours.
Hmm.
If you listen to the first 15 minutes, at least for me, I would think, why would anyone ever drink again after listening to
Okay.
what that? Because all he's doing, and I would guess he drink. Well, actually, I think he says he stopped drinking alcohol, but I think just the negative effect. He's just giving the science behind it.
Hmm.
What is alcohol? What does it do to your brain? And so I would suggest that people listen to that. Now, it was only about 2 weeks ago. Whatever health authority they have in Canada, I mean, I don't know what they call it, came out with a recommendation. And the recommendation ended up being they were kind of going two ways about it. As far as alcohol, they're saying, I think it was like 2 drinks a week. Their suggested, though, was no alcohol. They
Hmm.
were saying none. But they said, okay, if you're going to drink, keep it to, 2 drinks a week. And so the evidence is becoming more clear that there are negative effects on your brain.
Yeah.
And I think if we're talking about longevity and you want to, make it less likely that you're going to have dementia or Alzheimer's, I would really look at the alcohol consumption.
Hmm.
Certainly cigarettes. I mean, most people don't need to be told much more than don't smoke because it's
Hmm.
just so negative on your health. It really ages you. So those type of lifestyles, and then what we eat
Yes.
makes a huge difference. And without getting into a lot of detail, it's really about decreasing or eliminating processed foods
Hmm.
and eating whole foods is mostly what it is. Now, one of the other things that comes out of the blue zones is really they focus more on plants. And it
Yes.
doesn't have to be. I mean, they're going to eat some meats and so eating. I'm not saying be a vegetarian because I think there's some evidence that says it's not that healthy for you. You need some protein,
Hmm.
some plant, animal protein, like
Okay.
especially fish protein. But the focus in all these people I listen to is really more plant based.
Hmm.
And I don't think these people are vegetarian. They're just saying we do not have enough focus, at least in our culture, on plants and nuts, things like that, whole foods, whole wheat,
Hmm.
whole grains, things like that. So what we consume makes a huge difference.
I think this might be a good time to maybe talk about the food pyramid, or
Oh,
rather the lack of
well,
the food pyramid now and how it's gone away. And so, I mean, when the food pyramid came out, they pushed grains, 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 which really is just straight carbs. And yeah, our bodies love carbs, but, you know, now here we have this obesity epidemic that's going on in our country, and a lot of it is because we push those grains. And I mean, grains can be good for you, but if all you're eating is carbs, you're going to run into some problems.
well, and here's the problem. So here are some other things that stand out. In longevity, you want to really regulate your blood sugar levels,
Yes.
and carbs tend to pop your blood sugar levels up.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is cholesterol, which is really more, but now there's a genetic component to high cholesterol, but often it's associated with red meat. Although I think some of the things I've listened to lately is that it's really more dependent on genetics than anything.
Okay.
But so I think this is something I neglected to say at the start. You're going to find all these different ideas. And so
Yeah.
if you're, what you have to do is figure out what works for you, which is
Yeah.
kind of what I've done. And so there are some things that the research shows are really important physically for longevity, some supplements. Now, one is metformin, and I find this
Okay.
kind of across the board. And metformin is a drug that pretty benign, but it's used for diabetics or pre-diabetics. And
Mm-hmm.
what it does is it's from a plant. I can't remember what the plant is, but it controls your blood sugar level. And so people are fine. So, but that's also done by what you eat. So
Right.
decreasing sugar and things like that. But so a lot of people are advocating, a lot of these researchers are advocating people take metformin even if they aren't diabetic because there's no
Interesting.
side effects to it typically.
Interesting. So I looked this up just now, and the reason being is because I was curious, is because metformin, I mean, I'm familiar with this drug because my husband, Curtis, was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes very, very young. And a lot of it has to do with genetics. And the other part, too, is a lack of knowledge. And that's a lot of what we do on this podcast. And so I think that people don't understand that carbs turn to
Yeah,
sugar
right.
in your bloodstream. And so Curtis went his whole life not even thinking about it because he's like, I don't have a sweet tooth. I don't need a lot of sugar. But it turns out that he was, because he loves his carbs. He loves
Yeah,
his potato chips and he loves his rolls, right? And he loves bread and all of
yeah.
those things. And he would overindulge in them, not realizing that he was basically just eating a bunch of sugar. And so I looked up what plant metformin is derived from, and it's French lilac is
And
what it's from.
so the history, and I don't have a great memory. I should have a better memory for
Hmm.
all I'm trying to do. But my recollection is that it's been used for a long time to control blood sugar because of that plant. The other one is cholesterol.
Hmm.
And in fact, I got this from my own internist because he didn't qualify, say, to take a statin. So there's such things as statin, which help with our cholesterol. But a lot of people are advocating everyone to be on statins
Okay.
because the evidence is really clear that it increases your lifespan. I think it's something like 15 years
Mm.
just by being on a statin. And there are, how many of them are there? I think there are 3 or 4 of them at least. The first one I tried, I had a negative reaction to, which is common. There are several, and so you just try another one. And I've been on a statin for, well, I don't know, quite a few years, many years.
Yeah.
So those two things, controlling your cholesterol, controlling your blood sugar level. There's also a brand new medication that's out there called semaglutide, and it's quite pricey right now, but a lot of people have a lot of hope for that. And it's the same thing. It's about blood sugar levels.
Okay. Yeah.
And so doing those things and then taking supplements. So I take resveratrol every day.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's one of the things. Fish oil, vitamin D is also one of those things that most of us, because we use sunscreen, which we should, we aren't in the sun as much as maybe we used to be, have vitamin D deficiencies. And that can affect a lot of things. I mean, there's some, back in the early days of COVID, there was some speculation that people who were higher in vitamin D had better immune systems. I don't know if they
Interesting.
ever followed that up. But
Yeah.
I also know that as far as mental health issues like depression,
Hmm.
lack of vitamin D is, I think, most likely a factor. We've only touched on a few of these things, and I think we're
Yeah.
running out of time, aren't we?
Hmm.
So let me give some names.
Yes.
And I'll send these to you. You could put them in the program notes.
Hmm.
So David Sinclair, he is out of Harvard Medical School. He's a PhD, and that's his focus of his research
Hmm.
is longevity, and he has his own podcast called Lifespan,
Hmm.
and really interesting. I've listened to all of those episodes. David Sinclair, if you Google his name, you will find lots of different podcasts where he's talking to different people, like Andrew Huberman, Rich Roll. There are all these people who have well-established podcasts that he's talking with. So he's a good one to listen to. There's an MD. His name is Peter Attia, Attia, and he is a practicing physician, has a clinic in Austin. But he's also into this, as far as longevity, what we can do for longevity. Strength training, I didn't mention that. Strength training as we age is really critical. And so, the aerobics plus the strength training is staying active. So those are two of the people that I think you can get started. And, if you have more interest, they're going to talk about the supplements that they use, the things that they think are important. The consistent themes, though, are exercise, keep your brain active and keep your mind active. And then what you eat is really critical, those three things. And then the fourth one, relationships.
Yes.
We talked about that a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we talk about relationships till the cows come home, right? Like that's
But it
our
turns out
favorite
they're
topic.
critical for longevity.
Yeah. And, and that makes a lot of sense because relationships really do make us happy, and we're social creatures and we genuinely need that social interaction. Now, there is one thing that we didn't touch on that I want to bring up right before we end, and sleep is very important.
Yeah, sleep. Okay, sorry. That is absolutely right.
Yes.
You have to figure out your sleep. And Andrew Huberman, so there's let's see, his name's Matthew Walker. So if people want to learn more about sleep, he deals in sleep out of UC Berkeley. So he's a really good one to listen to if you're having trouble sleeping. But yes, sleep is critical.
Yeah. So the idea of all of this is it's not just about living as long as you can, but it's about living healthy, right?
Living your best life. Yeah.
Yeah. I talked earlier about Curtis's grandma, and, she's 92 years old. And I remember being young and thinking, man, I want to live to be over 100. And, then I talk to people who are that old and I'm like, I don't know if I want that. Right. And a lot of it is because it almost seems like they're trapped, right? Because I mean, they've lived this ripe old age, but they don't do much. They can't do much and they feel so limited and they feel more like they're a burden. And so, that's, I guess, what this is about, is it's not just about the number, it's about the quality of your life as well.
Right. But the time to start working on this is when you're 20 and 30 and 40. And if you wait till you're 50 or 60, kind of like me, it gets a little bit harder. Although I have this weird thing. Did I tell you this? So I used to have an all white beard.
I think you told me about this.
And I don't know if you can see it, but it's starting to be darker. And that has only changed with the supplements that I'm taking over the course of, say, a year. Anyway, it's really strange because my hair is starting to come in dark again.
That is so weird.
I don't know what that's about, but I suspect it's based on some of the things I'm taking. Okay. But eventually it's going to look like I'm coloring my beard, but I'm not. It's just going dark.
Which, I mean, I don't know. That's pretty cool, though.
So my beard is getting younger. That's what
your beard is getting younger. Yes. My mind is aging, but my beard is Benjamin Button. You've got a Benjamin Button beard.
Right.
All right. So next week, we're going to get into sexual types. So we'll explain more about that when the time comes, but I think it's going to be a good one. So in the meantime, we will see you all next week.
Have a good week, everyone.
Have a question for Dr. Burton? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Liz Lang. Music is by Audio Lounge.